Hi, I'm Anchor Pete. On today's episode of Anchor's Points, we're switching things up a little bit. You love Zoom meetings, right? Well, today I had a Zoom meeting with author H.G. Daniel. H.G. Daniel is the author of The Fifth Ring, and on today's episode, you're going to find out why it's so awesome. So, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And how are things going in California right now for you?
It's crazy in here. We just stay inside and wear masks.
Yeah, it's kind of like that in Texas too. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And I'm glad that you're here because I subscribe to your Patreon. And I just think that a lot of my viewers would benefit from subscribing to your Patreon too. And so if you could you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And thanks to CNN for hosting this. No, I'm just kidding. I am just like a super huge sci-fi geek. I went to school and I studied writing and philosophy. What I really like is adventure. So we're going on a trip through the rings of Jupiter, but there's a lot more to it, and I don't want to spoil it for the rest of the video. So
Nice.
that's
Okay.
what's up.
So I've read a couple of the chapters of your book. I haven't read the most recent. And when I say book too, ultimately when your project is completed, you would want to be a complete novel, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so I really like the fact, just so my viewers know that the way that you're putting out your story is that for all the Patreon members, they get a new chapter every time you update it, right?
Yeah, that's right. Once a month, there's a new chapter. It's illustrated. We have a fantastic artist working on the book that we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one chapter a month. So it kind of feels a little bit like an old school science fiction serial or even a comic book series that you're following. Yeah. But at the end of the day, all the chapters do add up to a complete novel.
So when did you come up with the idea for having a Patreon account for your story?
Well, actually, I've gone through a lot of phases in my writing, and this is just the latest one. And so when I was in school studying writing, I got told that, I should basically just be writing the Clone Wars because that was where I was at the time.
Okay.
And there was no Clone Wars yet, actually, and I never got to do that. So I'm doing this instead. But in between now and then, I spent a really long time writing comic books that almost no one read. Yeah. And yeah. So actually, the main character of The Fifth Ring, HEJIRA, is named after a Joni Mitchell album and is the oldest character that I've ever come up with. Okay. And she was in the first comic book series that I ever came up with. And I actually came up with it sitting on the floor of the New York City Downtown Jazz Fest in New York City. Yeah. Like a long, long time ago, over a decade ago. Right. And I had to abandon all of the bones of that story, except that it was a girl named HEJIRA with dreadlocks and a super huge Buster Sword like Cloud in Final Fantasy VII, right. Fighting somewhere with Jupiter in the sky. I was in a different place with my writing back then. Right. So because I'm trying to do a lot more with it now and carry it off with, not as a comic book series, but as a novel, a serial novel, even with illustrations. Yeah. I have to do a lot of different stuff with it. So it's cool to see that character come back around and finally get her due and her time in the spotlight. But, it's also a story that's doing a lot more than just kind of like having a battle around on the surface of Titan. So,
yeah. And one of the things that I loved so much about what I'd read of your story was that it kind of had this sort of like, post-apocalyptic feeling, this sort of like Mad Max, like this kind of scavenger kind of feeling, but yet it was set in spaceships or like interlocking, space debris, right? And I just thought that was such a great concept. And like, was that originally going to be the setting? Like, I know you said that you had the idea of HEJIRA, but then once you knew you were going to tell this specific story, were you like, oh, I wanted to have this setting?
Well, actually, the setting is not part of the original story. The original story, and thank goodness it didn't happen because they probably would have gotten sued for this, was called Bratz. And it took place, there's like a doll line, I think. Oh. And there's already a lot of litigation surrounding the doll line, I believe. And it would have just been a bunch of warlords fighting on the surface of the moons of the planets. So there's a little bit of that feel, going on here, but what we're doing with the characters and what we're doing with the story is really, it's a vast improvement over the first story I ever wrote, as I would hope it would be. So instead of fighting on the surface of the moons of Jupiter, they're going to fight in orbit on the remains of 2 battle fleets that came a generation earlier to fight in the orbit of Jupiter. So Jupiter actually has 4 ring systems. And so now we are in the 5th ring, and the 5th ring system is the gravitational aggregate of the debris of the war that their parents fought in. Oh. So our characters are literally on the last vector that their parents' ships took to death.
Yeah.
And they are faced with no other option than to continue fighting in this space. I thought this is really a better way to tell a story because it sets a lot of the value that the story has, at least from a more literary standpoint, in the setting. Mm. And then you're going to be able to bring a whole different value to the story itself and the characters and the adventure that they have. And to be honest, it has a chance to be a lot more fun because you're flying around there, you know, having like an action movie good time. When in the background, you're really kind of realizing that, like, it's kind of fucked up that they have to fight this way at all. And that's a realization that the main character has, too. So I was going to say that it maybe didn't have such a link to the story that I wanted to tell, but really, in fact, it's integral.
I can tell just from reading it, too, you know, how much of the backstory, how it plays into the main story so much, you know. And it doesn't feel like you're just doing, like, an exposition dump. It really does feel like the backstory is influential to what's happening in the action.
I'm really glad to hear that because that is definitely a huge fear of, I guess, any writer, yes, but especially a writer who's going to be switching mediums from comic books to prose.
Yeah.
And, you know, not having the obvious distinction there of this is an establishing shot with a lot of narration boxes in it.
Right.
Whereas, you know, you've got to still be excited when it's all 12-point black and white font.
Like, okay. I personally have always wanted to write comics as well, right? And I've written a couple of comic scripts too, but I always have that fear that, like, I would put so much time and money into a comic and then no one would see it. And I think you kind of touched upon that idea yourself, right? Like, and so I thought, well, if it's prose, at least I'm just responsible for it myself, right? And so was that kind of an influence on why you decided to write prose for this story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's a real struggle out there as a comic book creator to get your work in front of people and get it produced in the first place. And, you know, the expense of booking a table and then booking a hotel and then traveling to the convention.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I did it a couple times. I got to say that, you know, until that part of my writing career started falling off, it was a great experience those first couple of times. And, like, honestly, Pete, seriously, you should do it. You should really seriously do it. And I think that the best way to do it is to approach it like with a real cognizance of what exactly it is that you want to do and what it is that you want to get out of it. And I think that I probably didn't succeed because I was reaching a little too far too soon in my writing career. And I think that just having something on Patreon that's like a solid groundwork for me is something that's really good, and I can share it with the people who appreciate it and kind of like start at the bottom. Yeah. But the other truth is that, you know, I had to come to that realization. I mean, I'm not saying that it was like a great leap. I'm just saying, like, you know, it helps to like articulate these things specifically. So if you want to go and do it, don't be like, I'm going to be famous. Don't be like, I'm going to blow out my bank account and waste all my time. Be like, I'm going to go have this experience of being a person who got to make a comic book and show it to people at a convention. And like, oh my God, dude, you're going to sell like 3 of them and you're going to come home like over the moon. And you're not going to just sell 3. You're going to sell way more than 3. But if you just sold 3, wouldn't you be at least that happy? Because I was, and I sold only slightly more than 3. I mean, okay, I sold a lot more than 3, but I'm still telling you, like, before I went to the convention, I had them printed and I had them in my car and I had to get my tires rotated and I gave the dude a comic book and I got like 10% off my tire rotation.
That's awesome.
Yeah. You're just going to be like phenomenally happy when this happens. So I just like, I fully encourage you to do it.
Okay. Awesome.
Definitely do it. Can I flip this interview on you and ask you like what comic book you would do if you're going to do like one comic book? Like, do you have like an old idea?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so as far as for me, I play role playing games a lot, right?
Okay.
And so at one point, I realized like my stories weren't getting made, so I decided to make a role playing game on my stories, right?
Okay.
Like there was a whole role playing company called White Wolf where they would
Hmm.
make like a werewolf game and a vampire game and a mummy game, right? And so I started to use those rules and I made this kind of universe that was very much monster influenced, but it was like in the real world, right?
Okay.
And so I had my friends play it, and we just had these stories going on, and like we have like years of playing games together, right? And we've developed characters, and I've kind of expanded, and I've incorporated like all the different role playing games into one shared universe. I mean, like,
Rad, man.
yeah, and so like I have like stories, I have um specific characters. I have all different comics
Hmm.
I would want to tell about. It's actually hard to kind of narrow down which one would be my
Well,
first.
well, dude. So that's the thing. That's your brats. So you don't go back. So listen, that's the thing. And another way to just have to be really conscientious about it. To say that like I don't get to tell brats. Like that story died when I wasn't able to bring it to life when it was the first thing I wrote. But I didn't give up on HEJIRA. So you don't give up on these characters. You don't get to tell your brats. But take one of these characters and just do. I mean, dude, I didn't put it this way, so I have to put it this way now. I was ruthless when I stripped away the old parts of HEJIRA's story and told myself they had no place if I wanted to bring her anywhere near my new writing. And
Right.
so just be absolutely brutal with yourself when you
Right.
leave the old elements by the wayside, when you pick whatever of value it is from your D&D games and all of your stories and bring it forward and make it like a baller one shot. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Because you said that about Patrick Rothfuss, the Patrick Rothfuss book, and I really enjoyed your Kingkiller Chronicle video, by the way.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that you had such an accurate observation when you were like his whole kind of adventure on the road before he goes back to the endemic area, nation or whatever, is like clearly a D&D game.
Oh yeah,
that Patrick Rothfuss played with his friends, and it's like, dude,
Yeah.
I didn't even make that connection because I don't do the tabletop gaming, but I didn't even make that connection. I'm like, oh my god, it so clearly is.
Yeah, you said something about Clone Wars before, which is real interesting to me. You're saying that you were basically writing Clone Wars. Like, what was that?
I studied creative writing in school and was, I went to the class and I was like, this is a thing you can do,
Right.
like in school or after it.
Right.
So yeah, I went to the class and the teacher said, who wants to volunteer to write the first story? And I said, oh my God, me. And I went home and I wrote an episode of the Clone Wars. And that was before the Clone Wars had aired.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I went back to the class. It was a really great story, and I still have it. And maybe if I should set some kind of like ridiculous goal for signups on the Patreon, and I'll post it. It's the first thing I ever wrote, and it's the story of the Padawan apprentice of Isla Secura, the Twilight Jedi who died on Felucia during Order 66. And so the story picks up. My faux episode of the Clone Wars picks up right after Order 66, and her Padawan senses her death in the Force, and she gets one message: run. And so she runs, and eventually she falls into a lake, and she pops out of the lake, aces a couple of clone troopers that are coming for her.
Right.
And then she sees in the distance against the sunset this kind of like pyramidic temple. And so she gets a feeling in the Force, and she climbs the temple, and she fights a dark side wraith inside the temple, and she's about to kill it.
Yeah.
But at that point, Bail Organa and Yoda show up in the Tantive 4 overhead. Right. Yoda comes down, and his like awesome Jedi skills and mastery of the Force just completely defuse the situation and stop hostilities. They leave the Dark Force wraith like in the temple because that's part of the balance of the Force, and Yoda takes the late Isla's Padawan up into the Tantive 4, and they escape.
Dude, that's awesome. So it's like a post-Order 66 kind of story.
Like a post-Order 66 one-shot of the Clone Wars. And my teacher was like, that sucked.
Oh.
And I was like, excuse me? And I was like, holy shit, I thought it was awesome. Like,
sounds awesome.
Like, I'm not a pro here, but like, I kind of thought I was on the money.
Right.
And he's like, it's not a good story.
Yeah.
because the character didn't face anything or go through anything. And I said, you know, I don't think you really have a grasp of what's going on here, because she faced like falling to the dark side any number of times, like at a point where she was really like psychologically vulnerable to doing that because she just felt the death of her master in the Force.
Yeah.
So, and I think he saw like, oh, well, it's a matter of fact, right? So I don't think that really went through, but
Yeah.
I have to admit that, like we were just saying that, you know, you can't expect to be the best writer there is. You can only expect to be the best writer you can be,
Right.
and to improve your writing every day. I will admit that, you know, as disheartening as it was to hear that when I was all giddy and turning in my first story,
Right.
he was right, because that's definitely a weakness in my writing. And as I strive to be a better writer, it's something that I've tried to address and to reach for, is to write better characters and to put them through more and to come closer to killing my darlings. Because that's something that all writers really hate to do. And I will admit that the characters in the Fifth Ring are going to go through a lot, but you're going to have fun reading the story, because I'm not quite as mean to my characters as other people are.
Okay, so Dan, you know, I noticed that on your Patreon you have artwork, you know, to support your story too, and the artwork is really awesome. Is there anything you can tell me about the artist?
Actually, the artist has been incredible to work with, and every single piece has been just a dream. The artist is Alexandra Pesakovic, and I met them on Twitter because we both kind of hang out in the Transformers Z fan circles. We met when I saw a piece they'd done for a Transformers zine, and a bunch more that reminded me of my favorite manga artist, Tsutomu Nihei. Alexandra was a fan, and we connected over our shared love of his work, so that's why their illustrations for my story are so different from their usual work, which, by the way, is also just absolutely mind-shattering, so definitely go check that out. So you can find that at twitter.com/Omne-chan, underscore between Omne and Chan.
Okay. And I'll put that in the description too.
Yeah. Link in the description. Like and subscribe. I
guess like for like our final question, right? What do you see moving forward? Like, what do you see happening with Fifth Ring, and what other projects might you have on the back burner?
Well, that's really exciting. I got to say, before I came to do this interview, I was finishing up a really advanced, far-along chapter of the Fifth Ring. So it's been really funny to have to give this interview and be like, well, I can't really spoil all the things that I've just been writing. I have to, you know, make sure that it's as though I'm only as far along as the publication is. Right. But I'd like to finish the Fifth Ring. I'm really just over the moon, or over the moons of Jupiter. I should make a really lame pun. I owe it to myself to you know, fall on that rake. And so I'm over the moons of Jupiter that people are reading it. And the only thing I could ask for really is that more people would be reading it. I want to finish the story. I'd like to get it published as a book. On the way to getting it published as a book, I would like the publisher to pay Omne-chan out the nose to do an extra illustration for every chapter, if not more, and a cover, hopefully. And then I've got 2 other books that I actually have planned.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're planned already. If people would really prefer that I keep writing about spaceships, believe me, I can do that. But one is a tale about a future Earth with an anti-education theme, global warming. The Earth is flooded. There are fish people.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that. There are still humans,
right?
But mostly it's fish people.
Okay.
And the other one is a 60s period piece with superheroes.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm kind of pumped to get into those, and I hope that the people who are on the Patreon will stick around and enjoy them as well, because they'll be published the same way.
Yeah.
One chapter at a time, with great fervor and gusto, and hopefully illustrations.
Awesome, man. Okay. So Dan, you know, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. You know, I do follow you on Twitter, and you follow me, and, you know, I like the stuff you post, especially the Transformers stuff. You know, but it's really good to talk to you in person and just kind of see that we have kind of similar paths in a lot of ways. And, you know, I just really love your story, and I'm excited about the other stories. And you know, honestly, I was thinking that maybe you could even put like your comic on Patreon at one point, right? The one that you had made a while ago, and maybe even your Clone Wars story. I think people after this interview might be eager to look at that stuff.
Well, that'd actually be really cool. I'd be excited to get anything that I've written in front of people, to be perfectly honest with you, because to me, I'm at a point where everyone who reads it, it's really an honor to me. So
Yeah.
if you're watching this video, believe me when I say it, if you turn around and sign up for just $1 a month on the Patreon, it is going to mean the world to me. And if you want it to mean Earth or you want it to mean Jupiter, it's your call. Thank you.
Very nice.
And
yeah.
Pete, seriously, while I'm out there pitching the people, let me reel it back and say thanks for having me, because it's been an absolute pleasure and it's been so super cool. So really a lot of fun and an honor to be on your YouTube channel, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.